On today's episode of the Manlihood ManCast, the bots have taken over. You always knew artificial intelligence would be your downfall. Muhahahaha.
In a culture that scoffs at honor, you can rise up to lead and to shine. It's time to be the best man that you can be. This is the Manlihood ManCast. Here's your host, Josh Hatcher.
Gentlemen, welcome to the Manlihood ManCast. Your regular host has been taken over this week by artificial intelligence. Today, we will be sending out our spiders to capture the best clips of Josh Hatcher from Manlihood on the rest of the internet. Josh has appeared on several podcasts other than this one, and today, we'll bring you some of the best from those episodes. But before we get into it, men, if you want to grow and be a better man, you need to join the Manlihood Man Cave on Facebook. It's a place where men help build each other up. All men are welcome, and we challenge each other to grow. Josh and the crew keep the discussion going, and the men in the group support each other, and have each other's backs. Let's get into the show. Josh appeared on the Significant Man Recharge podcast with Warren Peterson. Here's a clip from the show.
Well, why don't we start with some basic definitional kind of things from your view? What's a man and what is masculinity?
Yeah, so it's funny that we even have to try to define that right now.
Right.
It feels absolutely ridiculous, to be honest with you. A man is an adult male. I think that's the first step, but I think that kind of beyond that biological definition, we really have to look at what that means to us. I know we hear the words be a man, and that means something to us. It means something different than what we're seeing, right? When you tell someone to man up or be a man, which I know, listen, we're going to ignore all the toxic masculinity references for at least long enough to talk about that for a second. Why do we say be a man and man up? And that's because we do believe that masculinity should have certain markers. We do believe that there are certain things that a man should do. And I know that our culture is starting to kind of rip that apart a little bit and maybe kind of, pick at the threads on the seam because they don't understand it. But it's honestly the truth. We think that a man should have a good moral character. We think that a man should live with integrity and live with courage, that demonstrates strength physically and emotionally. These are things that we expect out of a man. And I think there's a reason that we expect them out of a man, because I think that's what a man is supposed to be. I think that's part of it, and like I said, we could get into the whole toxic masculinity controversy actually brings to light some things that are worth talking about, like, using bullying language to put other people down or making people feel like they're not man enough or good enough when, that's an issue and we should be able to talk about that issue. But, I think really to be a man is to have a moral code to live up to what the expectations are of being a man. I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of what you said in there, we could dig into. I want to focus on, you brought up toxic masculinity there. That's obviously a hot button issue in the world right now. From your view, what does that mean when somebody says toxic masculinity, and how would that compare to the opposite, to healthy masculinity, or however we want to define it? Like, what are those two things from your view?
Well, usually when I typically hear the words toxic masculinity, I tend to think that person spent way too much time on TikTok.
Yeah.
They're being indoctrinated with this concept of this, and there's a problem with it. And I think that we shouldn't, like I said, I brought up the words and we talk about it, but honestly, I don't like what it has created. there are legitimate issues to discuss. But when you put the words toxic and masculinity together like that, and then you let it take over, what's happened is now we have an entire generation of people that don't understand masculinity because their only word association they have with it is toxic.
Yeah.
And, the concept of toxic masculinity, the concept there is real. There's some real things that we should be concerned about. Like, can a man cry without being called a pansy? Yes, a man can cry without being called a pansy, and he should be able to work through and express his emotions, and we shouldn't bully him for having emotions or having things he needs to work through. That concept as one of, should a man just assume that he has the right to catcall and whistle at a woman or, sexually harass a woman? No, a man does not have that right. Those are things that are associated with that concept that we need to address. We do need to address those. But my issue is toxic masculinity then becomes a buzzword, and it damages the very nature of the other word. Masculinity itself shouldn't be thought of as toxic. It's not toxic. Masculinity is not toxic. And if it's toxic, it's probably not masculine, to be honest with you. I think that we want to define masculinity with that moral code, which treats people the right way, which values things properly. When we settle in on that buzzword, we completely take away from, what's happening there. So I think that's a dangerous position that we can get into if we're not careful. I mean, a couple of years ago, the American Psychological Association put out that traditional masculinity was dangerous. Like when did that happen? Where it started out as toxic masculinity being dangerous, now it's traditional masculinity being dangerous. Where's the danger here?
Right.
Are you saying that to be a man who has traditional values, that's what's dangerous? Are you saying that being a man who is old-fashioned or that practices traditions? I mean, we have to be really careful what words we put out there. I can think of a lot of young boys that are growing up thinking that it's wrong to be a boy. It's wrong to be a man. That's a problem.
7, 0, 2.
Josh Hatcher also appeared on Maximus with Cam Sepah. Here's another clip from that episode.
I was always kind of an outcast though. So like I had a little brother who was 5 years younger, but I didn't have any friends. I went to school and I looking back on it, I think that my brain worked differently. I as an adult, I found out I have ADHD. Nobody knew what that was then or believed what that was then.
Right.
And so I was a creative kid. I was kind of, I wasn't athletic or in any way whatsoever coordinated. So I didn't fit in with the jock kids and yeah, so I was definitely the target of a lot of bullying and had to fight because back in those days, the best cure for a bully was a punch in the nose.
Right.
And that was how you ended bullying. Now we have it where if you stand up for yourself, then you're the bad guy.
Sure.
But yeah, so I had to fight to protect myself. And there were times, I'm going to say from 6th to 8th grade where it was almost every day.
Wow. Yeah.
And, and I like to tell everybody I was gay bullied before being gay bullied was cool and I wasn't even gay. So
yeah. That's tough. I think it's actually these experiences are really important for our listeners to listen to, especially because, I think probably a lot of our demographic is probably a little bit more urban and only hears about these things sort of secondhand, maybe even thirdhand. So it sounds like, kind of growing up in that rural environment, it was a double-edged sword if I'm hearing you, certainly sounds like very idyllic in terms of the watering hole and swimming and the outdoors activities. I think, kids who kind of grew up in city life, it boggles my mind when I hear people who've never seen stars, because they never left the city and anywhere that has too much light pollution. But on the other hand, yeah, it sounds like, small town mentality is kind of the downside. So I'm curious how you cope with all that. So in addition to obviously kind of standing up for yourself, how did you sort of cope in terms of maybe a little bit of the outcastedness or social isolation?
So it's funny that you mentioned the stars because the town I grew up in, we were right near one of the darkest skies. on the east of the Mississippi. And so people come from all over the world to look at the stars there. And I remember my dad, who grew up in East St. Louis, always telling me, we'd go somewhere in the evening and come home and it would be dark, and we'd just wait before we walked in the house. And he'd be like, look up. And he said, not everybody gets to see this. And you could see the Milky Way, you could see shooting stars, and you could see every plane and satellite in the sky, and every star and everything, and honestly, what I had, the only way that I coped was I had good parents, who loved me. Now, no parents are perfect, but they were good parents. I didn't know that it was safe to tell them what I was going through. Maybe it was because for me, home was so safe. I didn't want to bring that world into my home, I think.
Interesting. Yeah.
And at the same time, there were, I look at, there was also, home was safe, but there was also stuff where, it's also not safe in a lot of ways too. I didn't want to get blamed for things. I didn't want to stir up things. I didn't want to make it unsafe,
Right.
And so I just kept a lot of that junk to myself and absorbed it.
Yeah.
And, and so it was about 8th grade before things really changed for me. I grew up in an old fashioned Baptist church, and, 3 times a week we'd go to church and listen to old organ music. And I loved it because, the old people were my friends, the old guy that always had candy in his pocket or quarters in his pocket that would give you, a piece of candy. Now we would think that's creepy. In the city, somebody would think that's creepy.
Sure.
This was just an old guy that loved kids, and he was nice. He was safe. We all knew he was safe, and he'd give all the kids a piece of candy every week, and, so that was honestly the community that I grew up in, was just these old people who looked out for me and, told me I looked handsome. And, the old ladies would be like, you look so handsome today in your polyester vest, and your clip-on tie. and so I had a sense of belonging there. And I think that really had a lot to do with shaping me as well, so that was important.
Absolutely. It reminds me a lot of, some of Robert Bly's work, and talking about how the loss of sort of the extended community, the village, if you will, has kind of really been a downside to sort of like modern American culture, right? Because we can only get so much even from our primary families. To your point, like, sounds like you did have good parents, but maybe they're not aware of the bullying. And so if you're not sort of getting those needs met, or it's difficult to at least talk about it, then you can get it from other older members of the community, right? Kind of surrogate uncles and aunts, if you will. And it sounds like church was the place to do that. So I'm glad that was certainly an outlet.
Josh Etcher talked about manlyhood and more on the Vital Masculinity podcast.
Statistically, also, the other thing I think that's lacking and missing that we don't talk about is the fatherhood situation in a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of these situations. There are dads that are either absent or disconnected or ill on their own. Number of these guys that do the father at home or never had a father at home, it's high. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of it, and I'm not saying that guys that don't have a father are all going to turn out like that. What I'm saying is, men, be a father to your children. If something happens and you are separated from their mother, and I understand that there are a million reasons why that can happen, do whatever you have to do to be a father to that child. And you be involved, and you teach that child right from wrong. And you teach that child, hey, guess what? This is a gun. And you never point a gun at something unless you want to kill it. That's
even if you know it's not loaded.
Yeah, people don't understand that. That's how we learn to use firearms, is from a father. My dad has been passed away. He's been gone for 2 years, and I can still hear his voice in my head every time I pick up a loaded weapon, reminding me how to handle it and what to do with it, because he drilled it into me. Like, this is how you handle this, because this is what a man does. He makes sure that he doesn't accidentally do this, or he doesn't do this the wrong way. Mm-hmm. The problem, I think, we want to blame masculinity for the problems we have, but honestly, what we need is more. This guy who went into the massage parlor, it seems to me he didn't have a good father figure teaching him how to properly value women. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like seems to me like a father who is showing real love and affection for his mother in front of him would teach him that, you know, and yes, I know that, again, not everybody has a father. I mean, the divorce rates are staggering, and there's a lot of people who grow up without that. And so if there's boys in your neighborhood, invite them into your home, you know, and show them and model for them what it means to be a good man, you know?
Yep. It reminds me of the time where, I forget where it was, but somewhere in Africa, they had a reserve where they had a bunch of teenage bull elephants that were just running rampant, and they couldn't figure out why these things were doing it. But what they had done is they had put them in there to breed. And so they kind of pulled them away as young ones, or pulled the men out, one of the two. And the only thing they had to do was just put like one or two adult, like old male elephants in that reserve. And immediately those adult elephants checked their behavior and got them in line. And they stopped, terrorizing they were just tearing down shit and just messing stuff up. And it's like, well, yeah, like if you look at an underpass or whatever, you can see, boys are boys, and they're going to do vandalistic things if they're not unchecked. Because I think that it's not that we need just more masculinity in general. I do think we need that, but I think that we need to have a masculinity that is bridled and ordered towards what is right, just, and good. And we need, because right now, whatever masculinity we have is towards, ambition. Like there's a lot that's towards the, I'm going to be super successful. I see that all the time. We have people, the next Jeff Bezos, the next that is a masculine thing in a way, to want that, to have that ambition. But we need to have that bridled in a way that's ordered towards what is right and what is good.
Yeah, I that's one of the things I really like about Stephen Mansfield, who talks in that kind of leadership language where he's talking a lot about, success and things like that. But he also focuses on the concept of noble masculinity and, like as opposed to toxic masculinity. And, I really honestly, I think that that's what we're lacking. So, when I read a story in the news about some guy dude, I just read one the other day where there's a guy that, his baby was found almost fatally injured, like here in my hometown, and actually, know the mother, and my heart's breaking for this situation, knowing what they're going through. And, that is not masculine behavior. He's a male, but a man doesn't do that, I mean, how many times have we heard that? Like a real man doesn't, injure an infant, or a real man doesn't beat a woman. I think that, masculinity by its nature has a certain degree of virtue to it, or should have that. So yes, I agree with what you're saying. I just think that should be assumed about manhood and masculinity, because if it's not, then what it is just overgrown boyhood without any virtue woven into it,
As always, thank you for tuning into the Manlihood ManCast. If Josh were manning the show instead of the bots, he would tell you he loves you, he cares about you, and he'll see you next time.
If you want to be a better man, check out our website, manlihood.com, for blogs, videos, and more from our Manlihood team. And you can also join our private Facebook group, Manlihood Man Cave, where you can meet up with a band of brothers who will challenge you and help you on your journey of manhood. This episode is produced by Hatcher Media for manlihood.com. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to the show. Tune in again for more of the Manlihood ManCast.